Facepalm America, I'm Beowulf Rockland. FacepalmAmerica.com is where you can go for more information about this program, listen to past episodes, and connect with us on social media. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. That is what is being celebrated today across the United States and in many parts of the world. It is celebrated by people who, have a basic morality, I think. Unfortunately, that does not seem to apply to everyone, especially those that are part of the MAGA movement. You've probably seen online pictures of Charlie Kirk. I actually had the dubious distinction of meeting him once in Washington, D.C., and getting a recording of him. It was a very brief, kind of innocuous interaction. But you will notice online, you might know him if you are a follower and a connoisseur of memes, that he has or has been edited to have a very small face, Mr. Charlie Kirk. He also kind of has, in my opinion, a very small sense of morality and a small moral compass. Because according to Wired magazine, he is essentially turning against Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., trashing his legacy and turning against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I have on my desktop a picture of my grandfather, and he is in the background of the signing. It was after the signing itself, but in the background, he was a reporter at the time, and you can see him over, I think, LBJ's shoulder or in the background as he's milling around after the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Again, that's the law which legally ended segregation in the United States of America, or most forms of it, at least legally speaking, in the eyes of the law. So this is something that we have to talk about. It just absolutely is, because this is a new step towards evil. And I brought on today Dante King. He is the author of The 400-Year Holocaust, White America's Legal, Psychopathic, and Sociopathic Black Genocide, and the Revolt Against Critical Race Theory. By the way, you can go to DanteKing.com to learn more, and there are courses that he teaches that are available there. Dante, welcome to Facepalm America. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be with you today.
Thank you. And why is it, for a long time, the quote-unquote conservatives, I prefer these days to say the far right, because I don't really think that they are anything akin to what is actually conservative, at least in the traditional sense. For a long time, they tried to claim Dr. Martin Luther King as one of their own. They said, he's really a conservative, he's really a Republican, and then they would take sort of like out of context quotes in order to prove that. They were kind of, in a way, riding his coattails. And now it seems like there is a turn, as indicated here by Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, to just thoroughly dismiss him, trash him, and the legacy of the Civil Rights Act. Why do you think this is happening at this particular time?
So one of the main facets of what I would consider contemporary conservatism is racism, and particularly anti-Blackness. And there's an interview that can actually be located on YouTube with Dr. Claude Anderson. This is about 29 years ago. He was on the Detroit Black Journal, and he says that by 2015, he's kind of forecasting 20 years ahead that we will see a generation of white people who are more anti-Black than the white people that we experienced or who were around prior to what we call the contemporary civil rights movement. So he forecasted that we would be experiencing a generation of white people who were very hateful towards Black people. One piece of that or reason for that is that, we are not taught the history of this country in terms of how race evolved in this country. But I also think that anti-Black sentiments have existed since the founding of this country, and even before that, when we go back to the colonial period, and you literally have the English giving other English people, other European white people, the right to murder Black people with impunity, as well as the right to even rape Black women and young Black girls. And so, Charlie Kirk, I think this conversation can begin and end with one word that you opened with, which is morality.
Yeah.
And so these people lack, there's an absence of morality when it comes to Black people.
Yeah. It really does seem like at one point, maybe it was a brief and shining moment, especially given the horrific history which you very rightly outline, where there was at least a bit of conscience about it. And now that seems to have evaporated, and they're just going back to, I hate to say it, but business as usual. I mean, in a way, what we have experienced since 1964 over the past generation or two really seems to be, I mean, in some ways, like, it really hasn't changed at all. But at least we changed about the way that we talked about things and the way that we wanted, to conceptualize ourselves. And I guess by we, I'm talking about white people, and the way we approached things in terms of the way we parse things. And now it really seems to be going back to just like forgetting all of that and pursuing essentially an anti-Black approach politically, legally. I mean, especially on the far right. But it really seems to apply across the political spectrum, because that it's just pulling us all in that direction. And in a lot of ways, even vast portions of the left really never left that, because I mean, today are the Iowa caucuses. And what do we focus on when we're talking about the Iowa caucuses? We're talking about the quote-unquote white working class and what white people want. So even people, in the media, such as myself, we're still like focused on that, and that and New Hampshire are the places that we're looking at, as opposed to where there are any significant numbers of people of color, and that guides us for the rest of the year. So in a way, it's kind of an indicator. So this is really more than just the MAGA movement, isn't it?
For sure. And I think when we go back to the founding of this country and we look at the development of the Constitution, but also laws that Congress enacted, one of the first essential laws that Congress enacted was a law concerning naturalization, which is the 1790 Naturalization Act, which emphasized whiteness as the main variable that someone had to possess in order to become a citizen. And so it stated that any person being a free white person could enter into citizenship having lived in the country for 2 years. And so understanding that European Americans, European immigrants who came to this country for a better life had to then join an organization called Whiteness, which is a political organization organized for economic power, positional power, with the presumption of superiority. Understanding that reality, we have to then begin to do the math and deduce that white people have been trained to really be obsessed with whiteness as the variable that sets them apart from other people. And I think when we trace that variable through history and we understand how white people were even willing to kill to protect their position, to protect their place based on that variable, not that we're all here functioning as, mutual human beings with mutual interests and trying to support each other, but know that a group of human beings are white. We're better. We need to protect that. We are the only ones who deserve opportunity. and so on and so forth. And so Dr. Bobby Wright and his work around the psychopathic racial personality, he says one of the things that in terms of a characteristic, when you look at the relationship between white people and black people, that white people became so psychopathic that they literally were trained to be psychopathic towards black people. And if you look at Winthrop Jordan's work, he wrote a book in the 1960s titled White Over Black. In the first chapter, he talks about the first impressions that Europeans had with black people, and they were literally obsessed over the darkness, over the dark hue, the melanin in African people's skins. And I don't think that that's ever left us, but I think it's much more severe now because it's been baked in, and we function in this culture as though these tenets are normal under the guise of normality, and they couldn't be more sick or distorted than distortion can possibly be.
Right. And whiteness is what becomes normalized, and everything else becomes the other. And what's fascinating to me at the same time is you're right. We have been taught since that time that white people came to America, and every generation of us since then, from birth, has basically been trained to be psychopathic about it, just completely obsessed, and also dehumanizing anyone who is not white, and yet it's so bizarre to me that in the past couple of generations, the response of at least temporarily taking a different public superficial view of that by a certain amount of the population has been just to deny that race is a thing, just to completely dissociate it from it, as opposed to, being obsessed with it at the same time, but also just denying its existence entirely, so as to try and distance oneself from the toxicity of racism. It's so bizarre to me.
Yes. And that variable that you're naming, I discussed that in my current book, and I'm also working on a second book, which centers the terminology diagnosing. So diagnosing whiteness and anti-blackness, because what you just referenced is really a psychosis that takes place. People literally battling with one reality while knowing there is another reality, but denying that in essence is the reality in which we're living. And I think there are many, this is a very complex topic because there are many different layers and many different extremes of it. On one hand, we have all of American institutions that were created under the guise of whiteness and really through Eurocentricity, which is fine, right? And so those of us who are not European, who are not, white European, we are then forced to assimilate, and that would be fine. That would be okay. Unfortunately, though, we're forced to assimilate, but then the standards of Eurocentricity are weaponized against us, because even when we try to follow the playbook, we don't get the same passes that white people get. We don't get the same opportunities that white people get. And I share a few studies in my book, one being a legal memo study, where when they thought that a legal memo, they gave it to a hypothetical situation where they gave a legal memo to two different control groups of different races and ethnicities. And they told one group that the author of the memo was white. They told the other group that the author of the memo was black, and they were supposed to be third-year law students. The group that got the memo and who they thought the author of the memo was white, they rated it substantially higher, gave it great qualitative comments. The group that got the memo and they thought that the author was black, they said that he was subpar. They couldn't believe he got into law school. So this programming that we have received allows us to not only think of white people as superior, but to think of them as supreme, to think of them as capable, competent, as setting the standard for humanity. And our programming that we receive specifically for Black people is one